Did you know that the average high school romance lasts about 3 weeks? Well, Katie Thomas and Greg Hollander broke that record by about 40 years. They met when she was just a freshman and he was a sophomore. From that moment on, they became inseparable. Yes, they had that true mythical love that seems to have stood the test of time and remained pure. I have to tell you that Kat and I were married for about 30 of those years, and I thought we were really happy. Our marriage was satisfying, and when Kathy gave birth to our daughter Joan, it brought us even closer. In general, in those years, I was a contented person. Let me introduce someone to bring you up to speed on this hot story. As for me, I am Thomas Marsh, and Katie is my loving wife for about the last 30 years. As I mentioned earlier, Kat and Greg dated throughout high school, and yes, she did lose her virginity to Greg. We know that all high school romances end eventually. Only in this case, it was more like a temporary break. Since Greg was a year older than Katie in school, he decided to make a lot of money after high school so he could marry Katie. That's what my wife says, and she said it often throughout our marriage. Anyway, after graduating from high school, Greg went to work on a pipeline in Alaska with his uncle, and that's where the trouble started. It appears that Greg stopped writing shortly after landing there, leaving Kat alone during her senior year. She eventually started dating some guy named Sam or Simpson or something, but it wasn't serious since her heart still belonged to her one and only Greg. Kat waited like an obedient friend, but Greg was absent and not very sociable. Apparently, Greg really enjoyed working on the pipeline and began a rather nomadic life, believing that his dear Kathy was still waiting for him to be rich and embrace her upon his return. Well, that certainly didn't happen. The reality of life is that everything goes on as usual and nothing ever stays the same. This was true for Katie when she went to college, got her degree, and met me at a party when she was 24. I was a little older than her at 29, but we made a good couple. I fell in love with her the moment I met her and thought she did the same to me. Our marriage was quite normal, and the only hiccup during our relationship was that 2 days before our wedding ceremony, a letter arrived from Greg. Just like the prodigal son, he was finally returning home and wanted her to meet him. Thank God that Kat's mother dissuaded her from returning to him, saying that she had a new life waiting for her and she shouldn't waste her time on that shit, as she called him. After several intense, emotional moments during which I worried that she was actually going to call off the wedding, Kathy finally went through with the ceremony, becoming my wife, Mrs. Katya Marsh. When Greg finally showed up, it was too late as Kat and I were already on our honeymoon. Greg, in a fit of despondency, apparently enlisted in the Marines. After our honeymoon, we settled into our new lives. Kat as a nurse and me as an insurance adjuster for a large insurance company. The job is certainly not glamorous, but it is stable and pays the bills. My marriage was strong, but there was just one tiny hiccup that kept repeating itself. Greg began texting Katie, and she happily responded to him. When I asked her if this was necessary, she became indignant and said, "Oh, Tom, don't be jealous. He's an old friend of mine who's single and in the Marines, and I'm just writing to keep his spirits up." Well, I can't plead ignorance, since I knew that he wrote to her regularly, and I also knew that she wrote back to him regularly. Neither her family nor I could convince her to stop writing until she received a letter saying that he had married a girl where he was stationed. This stopped the correspondence and my peace of mind returned. Over the next 3 years, I think she got 3 Christmas cards from Greg, and that was it. During this break in correspondence with Greg, our daughter Joan was born. With our baby in hand, Kathy and I came together like a team of mules and worked hard to build a house and farm so Joan could have a good life. Yes, life was good in those days, and we both worked together to raise and care for our child, but as always happens, something comes along to spoil it. One day, Katie received a letter from Greg. She never talked about it, but I noticed that our stamp consumption started to increase after that. I concluded that she was writing to Greg again, but I ignored it. After all, he was out there making the world safe for democracy, and I was here keeping my family's world safe from want. If they wanted to write to each other, that was really their business, no matter how I felt about it. Eventually, Kat started sharing with me some of the information she had gotten from Greg. He divorced his first wife, but now he had another. He saw battle and was apparently highly decorated. I listened with half an ear, but Katy spoke with pride for her soldier. I corrected her by saying that he would be upset if they called him a soldier since he was a Marine. Katy giggled sweetly and said, "Oh, I think I better watch this." Watching her talk about him really depressed me, but I hoped that someday she would finally forget about him and focus on her family. Well, she never did. Greg had served in the Marines for 30 years, been married and divorced 3 times, and now had enough medals to make General Patton jealous. I realized with horror that while Greg had become more charming to my wife over the years, I had only grown older and more predictable. My only hope was that Greg, when he was discharged from the Army, would live somewhere far away from us. Unfortunately, he didn't, and that's where we are now. Joan, our daughter, is grown up and now married to a great guy, Frank Campbell. Another great news is that they are expecting their first child. I am now 60, and I'm looking forward to the magical number 65, so I can retire and spend my last few years in peace and tranquility. Katy still looks great, and could still make my heart skip a beat. Little did I know that the peace of my life would soon be a thing of the past. It was Thursday when I returned home to find Kat, dressed to the nines, telling me we had a dinner reservation at 7. At first I thought I had memory loss and missed an anniversary or birthday, but after doing a few quick calculations, I realized that wasn't the case. Well, I played along and went to our bedroom to clean myself up and try to look in about the same league as Kat. Dinner was excellent and the restaurant was packed, which made me think Kat had something else on her mind other than just good food. Towards the end of our meal, I looked at her and stated, "Okay, now you can drop the bomb. I'm in a good mood and won't make a scene." One of my quirks is that I will never get angry in public. Working for an insurance company, you never lose your cool where it shows, and that kind of spilled over into my personal life. Kat knew this, and over the years, whenever she had something to say that she thought would upset me, she would simply take me out into a public place to break the news. Tonight I felt it was bad just by looking at her face. 30 years together and you will learn how to read your soulmate. I had bad feelings all over the board tonight, and I just knew it was going to ruin my night. Finally, with trepidation, she delivered the bad news. "Tom, I think you should know that Greg is back." I suddenly felt nauseous, but I was sure that it was not the quality of the food I had just eaten. I stared at her for a few moments, waiting for the other shoe to drop, but Kat just looked at me thoughtfully. Finally, I broke the awkward silence. "When you say back, do you mean on vacation?" She shook her head from side to side and said very quietly, "No, Tom, he's not on vacation. He was discharged from the Army and bought a house 2 streets away from us." With that, my panic level began to rise, and I quickly interjected, "And he's going to live there with his, what, 3rd wife?" And again she said quietly, "No, he got divorced again, but this time he had to lose part of his pension because of her." I tried to suppress my anger, but I couldn't and said, "Crap, it's just too loud." Some of the visitors sitting next to us looked at me in surprise. My swearing wasn't because Greg had lost part of his pension to his ex, but because he'd moved closer to us and I needed to know his motivation for doing so. I became more active. "Katy, you haven't met Greg, have you?" The expression on her face succinctly answered my question. She didn't even answer when I asked her my next question. "When and how, Katy?" She also looked a little depressed when she answered, "Yesterday he stopped by our house to tell me that we are now neighbors." My heart was beating like crazy, and I continued the interrogation, very afraid of what I might find out. "Did you sleep with him, Kat?" Once again, her face spoke volumes before she blurted out, "I did it, Tom, but it's not what you think." I looked deep into her eyes and almost growled, "I think, Kat, that my faithful wife slept with someone other than her husband. Now explain to me why this is not what I think it is." "I did it because he needed me, Tom. When he came up to me, he looked so lost. He's going through some anxiety or something about a divorce, and he needed me badly, so I tried to help him. I love you, Tom, but I realize I still love Greg too." Well, that's it. My wife slept with Greg, and he used PTSD and divorce as his ticket back into Kat's heart and into her bedroom. I looked her straight in the eyes and spoke as decisively as I had ever spoken to her in our entire marriage. Okay, Kat, the damage is done. We can get through this and get our lives back, but you can never sleep with him again. Do you understand me? She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said quietly but decisively, I can't promise that, Tom. I love him, and he needs me even more than you. I was shocked to hear these words from her lips, but was aware of the fact that a public restaurant is not the place to air our dirty laundry. I called the waiter and asked for the bill. 10 minutes later, we were in the car and heading home when I pressed it again. Kat, how can you sleep with him, knowing that you have a husband? Have you forgotten those vows we made together almost 30 years ago? Do you remember the part about abandoning all the others? Now she began to cry openly, and between sobs blurted out, I'm sorry, Tom, but he needs me, and we found each other again. I can't bear the thought of losing him, or you. I was stumped as to what I could do or say that would make her give him up. With a hint of anger in my voice, I said loudly, Well, then what do you suggest? Do we alternate days off? He gets you for New Year's and I get you for Christmas? Stop it, Kat. You can't have two men. She stopped sniffling and looked at me with a strange expression on her face. How about a vacation, Tom? Now it's my time to be embarrassed. What the hell are you talking about, Kat? She moved on to another topic. Listen, Tom, remember about 18 years ago when you took a year off to go back to school and get your master's degree? Well, you took it, did what needed to be done, and then returned to your previous position, and everything was fine. I shook my head irritably. Kat, how can you equate me getting a degree that benefited the company and my family with your involvement with this asshole that only benefits the two of you? At this point, I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine. Kat reached out and lovingly touched my face, saying her plea, Tom, I missed my last year of high school with Greg, and if I had had that year, we might not be facing the situation we are in tonight. Give me this year, and you and I will get rid of Greg, and I promise you that I will be the best wife I can be to you. I need this time, Tom. Please. I was sad, hurt, shocked, and depressed. I wanted to take Katie's neck with my hands and press until her eyes went dark. But then I remembered all these stories about prison and how cuckolded husbands lose their freedom and property. After turning it all over in my heat, I said, Okay, Kat, if this is what you want, you just go and do what you like. But, and this is a big but, don't ask me to sanction this, and just to be clear, I don't want to see or hear from you in any capacity for the entire year. Is it clear? And know that in a year, you may have no one to return to. I hoped that the draconian parameters I had put in place for her vacation might just dampen her enthusiasm. But it was no use. She didn't seem to hear a word I said after, Okay. She reached out and kissed me on the cheek, saying only, Okay. Thank you, Tom. You will see. You won't regret it. I shook my head and said, It's too late. I already regret it. That night she wanted to make love to me, but I just ignored her. The thought of her with Greg made me feel sick, and I didn't want to be physically intimate with her. As we were getting ready for bed, I grabbed a pillow and told her I was sleeping in the guest room. I saw that this really hurt her, and I was glad because maybe now she would reconsider what this vacation would lead to. The next morning, I woke up and prayed that last night was just an aberration and that Kat would think differently in the light of day. I was wrong. When I walked into the kitchen, she was preparing breakfast and looked like she had just won the lottery. She smiled at me and pointed to the calendar hanging on our wall. I couldn't help but notice that today's date, June 6th, was surrounded by a thick black line. I sat at the table and thought about the irony of this date. In 1944, thousands of soldiers and sailors sought to free Europe from a tyrant. Today I lost my wife to another oppressor. Katie was almost dizzy when she brought me breakfast. Placing it in front of me, she said, I know that you're worried, my love, but in a year from today, I will return to you and will be only yours. I really need this time to think about everything and get it out of my head, and I promise you that you won't regret it. She smiled contentedly at me when she spoke again. I called Greg this morning while you were still sleeping and told him all about how you gave me permission to go on vacation and he would pick me up in an hour. My heart sank with every word she said, but I had to give her another chance. Kat, you don't have to do this, and I wish you would think more time before you do this stupid thing. You cannot be sure that in 1 year you will cope with this clown. You just need to get him out of your head and work on getting our marriage back on track. I ask you not to risk destroying us. She smiled at me as if I were a fool and said kindly, Tom, I know how much you love me by giving me this time. Trust me, I know what I'm doing, and I will come back eventually, and our marriage will be even stronger. Now I need to finish packing, honey, so finish your breakfast. And just like that, she walked out of the kitchen, and for all intents and purposes of our marriage, too. I finished eating, even though my food had no taste, and got up to get dressed. Walking into our bedroom, I noticed that Kat had 3 large suitcases filled with her clothes and toiletries. She smiled at me and said tenderly, I think I have everything I need. Please take these bags to the porch for Greg. I looked at her blankly before answering. No. Her face seemed to lengthen, as she was shocked by my answer. I followed my negative answer. Listen, if you're hell-bent on ruining 30 years of marriage, you and the asshole can take your bags together. There is no way I will help you get into this stupid bed. Is it clear? Kat looked like she was about to cry before she answered irritably. He's not an asshole. Greg is a wonderful man and hero who served our country. This is more than you've ever done. I turned away, muttering, yes, he received medals, 3 meals a day, and traveled the world, while I had to spend 5 days a week at work to provide for you and our daughter. I think you're right. It didn't mean anything. Katie lugged all her luggage down the stairs to the driveway and gave me dirty looks with every bag she took. A few minutes later, a car pulled up to our house, and a man, who I can only assume was named Greg, got out and started loading her things. From our porch, Katie shouted to him that she would be right there, and then returned to the house to say goodbye to me. We awkwardly stood facing each other, and I was the first to break the silence. If you're really going to do this stupid thing, remember the ground rules. I don't want to see you or talk to you for this entire year. I think it was really starting to sink in what it might mean in her fevered brain, as she meekly replied, I understand, Tom, but everything will work out. You'll see. Remember that you agreed to give me a year. She waited for me to say something, but I remained silent. Finally, with a more confused expression on her face, she said quietly, I really love you. She leaned in to kiss me on the lips, but I turned away at the last second, so she just touched my cheek. I quickly said, I can't kiss you knowing that you're going to him. She started crying and then ran out of the house and straight into his arms. Standing at the front door, I watched her kiss him deeply, and rage rose from the depths of my soul. 2 minutes later, my driveway was as empty as my heart, and I truly realized that my wife was now another man's woman. I called into work sick that morning and immediately went to the hardware store to get new locks. I worked all morning changing the locks on the house and changing the security codes on the alarm system. The good news was that it kept me occupied and distracted from thinking about Katie. But when I finished, the sadness returned like a wave crashing on the shore. Then I did what any man would do. I turned off our home phone and started getting super drunk. The drinking session I was on was actually more of a search for relief from the pain I was feeling over losing Kat. But it was a failure. My battle with bacchanalia continued until Sunday morning. At this point, I ran out of booze, which was good because I felt like I was going to die physically, spiritually, and mentally. I went to bed and fell into a deep sleep, only to be awakened by a knock somewhere in the house. I slowly woke up and stumbled along, trying to find the sound, which turned out to be my daughter Joan knocking on the front door. When I let her in, she looked shocked by my condition and the smell of booze that hung throughout the house. Her first words were, "What the hell is going on, Dad?" I tried to concentrate. The sound of hammers in my skull was disturbing me, but I managed to croak, "What do you mean?" She looked at me as if I had grown a second head. She grabbed me and headed to the kitchen. "You need some coffee and food, Dad, and then you can explain to me what caused all this. An hour later, With food in my belly and coffee in my hand, I told her everything I knew about her mother and Greg. To say she was shocked would be an understatement. Dad, let me make this clear. Does she want to take a year off from your marriage to reunite with her old high school boyfriend and let the romance run its course? I nodded and replied, yes, something like that. Her next words were the same ones I had been asking myself since Friday. What are you going to do, Dad? I looked at her, and the words seemed to fall from my lips. Tomorrow I'll get sick again and go to the lawyer. She looked sad and began to say, I can't believe Mom would do something like that. Maybe it's a mental disorder? I looked at her with a blank face and answered drily, I have no idea, Joni. She looked at me with a sadness that I had never seen on her face before. I don't know what to say, Dad. I want to tell you to think about it, but honestly, this sounds like your best option. Joan stayed with me for a few more hours and prepared dinner for me to eat later. As she left, she kissed me and told me again how sorry she was. When she left, I asked, why did you even show up here today? She looked into my eyes. Mom called and asked me to come and check on you, but she didn't tell me why or where she was. I nodded as if I understood. Okay, thank you, and drive carefully, honey. I got really sick on Monday and also met with a lawyer. I was right in my judgment when I confronted Katie. As a result, although the divorce was a decisive blow in my favor due to my spouse's refusal and it could prevent her from receiving half of my pension, other marital assets were still in play. Now I know for sure that taking a year off from Katie could be a good opportunity to liquidate those assets. The next 3 weeks flew by quickly. I was really surprised how quickly I adjusted to being alone. The positive thing is that I realized that I felt a weight lifted from me because I no longer felt responsible for another person. The downside was waking up alone and going to bed alone. I didn't see or hear from Katie until mid-July. On Saturday, I went for a few drinks at Flynn's, an upscale tavern in our city. I was sitting at the bar when they walked in, holding hands like two teenagers in love. They were so passionate about each other that they didn't even notice that I was sitting at the bar. As I watched them, I paid particular attention to Greg. He was muscular and moderately attractive, and I could understand what Katie saw in him. But he seemed to dominate her while she seemed to cater to his every whim. He spoke, and she listened, looking into his mouth. As she stood up to go to the ladies' room, she finally saw me sitting at the bar and gave me a shy smile. Coming out of the ladies' room, she hesitantly approached me. Hello, Tom. How are you doing? I wanted to tell her to get out, but I maintained my manners and replied, Oh, about as good as you can expect when your wife of 30 years just leaves you for some scumbag. What else can I do for you? She seemed confused by my sarcastic response, but stood her ground. Tom, I need to get into our house. I left some personal items there, and when I tried to come in the other day, my key didn't work. I continued to smile and answered in a friendly tone. Well, Kat, you shouldn't have been surprised that your key doesn't work in my house since you don't live there anymore. She just stood there and looked at me with a confused expression on her face before I spoke again. I think you better get back to your boyfriend before he gets worried. I saw tears well up in her eyes as she turned and walked away, and I went back to more important matters, which was finishing my drink. 2 minutes later, I felt a rough hand on my shoulder as I was spun around in my chair to greet a very annoyed Greg. Hey, asshole, you made my woman cry and I don't like it. I felt like he was getting ready to hit me, and my heart began to pound as I realized that this guy could probably kill me before any help arrived. With more conviction than I felt, I went on the offensive. You are talking about my wife, not your woman, and since you stole her, you have nothing to say about what happens between the two of us. Now I'll tell you straight, asshole, you can hit me and impress her, but what impression will the cops make on you? I could see the wheels turning in his head and knew that Greg was not one of the world's great thinkers, but it encouraged me enough to continue my verbal attack. Now you have 2 options. 1, hit me and spend a couple of years in prison, or 2, get out of my sight and go sit on your stupid ass. My heart was pounding wildly in my chest, and some part of my brain was screaming, Why did you resist him? He will kill you. But I maintained a veneer of bravado as Greg stood there, considering his options. Luckily, at that moment, the manager came over and asked what the problem was. Greg looked at him belligerently before answering, "No problem," turning and slowly retreating toward Katie. 5 minutes later, they paid the bill and left. Driving home that evening, I wondered what personal items Katie wanted from the house and decided to find out. I spent about 3 hours unsuccessfully rummaging through closets and drawers until I pulled the boxes out of her bureau. Under the boxes were letters from Greg addressed to Katie. As I read them, it became very clear to me that this year with Greg had been in the works for a very long time. One letter, dated 5 years earlier, stated, "It was a relief to know that you still miss me as much as I miss you. When I get home, I want us to be together, so you will have to find some way to get rid of this weakling of a husband of yours." Reading them all was like reading a trashy novel. Most of them describe either what he intends to do to Katie or what they did in high school. By the time I finished, life without Kat became much easier. I didn't see or hear from Kat until September 1st, which was my birthday. When I came home from work that day, I found a covered potty on the porch and a happy birthday card. I took them inside, where I discovered that she had prepared a stew, which was my favorite dish. The card was supposed to wish me a happy birthday, and she wrote in it, "Tom, I know we're not supposed to communicate, but I couldn't just ignore the birthday of the person I love so much. I dream about us at night, my love, and I know that when this year is over, I will be completely yours, and he will be gone. Please never stop loving me or abandon us. Kat." My daughter Joan has been keeping an eye on me quite closely since Kat left and called me on my birthday. After some small talk, she finally gave the real reason for the call. "Dad, you know that my due date is in 3 weeks, right? How could I forget the birth of my first grandson?" "Yes, I know, honey. You and Frank must be so worried." A brief pause in the conversation alerted me to a potential problem when she spoke again. "Dad, Frank and I went to dinner with Mom and Greg. Mom wants to be there when my baby is born, and she wants Greg to be with her. I know you and your mom agreed that you won't communicate for a year, but can you make an exception for me? Just one time, please." I was a little taken aback to learn that Joan and her husband had dinner with these two, but I wouldn't spoil the birth of her first child. "Okay, Joan. She can come and bring the asshole with her if she needs to." Joan immediately corrected me. "Dad, stop calling him names. He's actually not such a bad guy, and he makes Mom really happy. I haven't seen her in such euphoria for many years." Now I was stunned, and then I felt a wave of anger wash over me as I spat out, "Your grandmother called him a shitter many years ago. Nothing has changed since then. And, wow, first you're all having lunch together, and now you're defending him. I don't know what he has in store, but I'd love to bottle it. Soon he will take my entire family away from me. Just out of curiosity, when are you going to start calling him Dad?" She spoke quickly, and I heard regret in her voice. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to sound like that. I can imagine how you feel, and I'm truly sorry." I interrupted her apology and said coldly, "It's okay. Forget about it. Listen, I have something in the oven that I need to take care of. Behave yourself." She said she loved me and hung up. It was probably then that I realized that my life would never be the same, and that it was time to start resisting. First, start liquidating my assets to lower my net worth. Secondly, get rid of my fear and start returning to the world again. The next few days were stressful for me. First, I received some advice from my lawyer about what I could do with my assets legally. Then I got a little self-defense insurance in the form of a stun gun. I decided that the next time Greg attacked me, I wouldn't be able to talk my way out of it. Third, I booked a trip to Vegas in October. And fourthly, I went online to find a woman my age who wants a good man for a stable long-term relationship. As for my assets, I could spend them or give them away. Since my wife does not live with me, it seems to be up to me how to distribute our assets. The reason I found this interesting is that it gave me quite a lot of leeway in what my future plans would be. When Joan gave birth, I was at work, and my secretary answered the phone. The call came from her husband, Frank, who was overjoyed to tell me that I now had a grandson. I congratulated him and said that I would come now. When I arrived at the hospital, I found out which room Joan was in and went straight there. As I approached the door, I overheard her talking to Katie. "Mom, what you and Dad are doing is incredibly pointless. Do you really want to lose him to Greg?" Kat's voice was soothing. "Don't worry, Joan. I'm not going to lose your father. He loves me too much to ever let me go. Plus, what I have now with Greg is amazing. It's hard for me to describe, but every day is the same as high school, only better now that we can sleep together. He treats me like I'm his princess, and he curls my toes every night. I have never had such wonderful sex in my life. I will truly miss this when I return to your father." Joan's voice sounded disgusted. "Mom, I don't want to hear about your sex life with Greg. I admit he's an amazing guy, and you two seem so well suited to each other. But I want my child to have grandparents who are together and not divorced or fighting. Please, Mom, you have to go back to Dad, and you better do it before it's too late. He may be boring and predictable and definitely not in the same league as Greg, but Dad will always be there for you. Greg is without a doubt a dreamboat, but sooner or later, all boats sail. On the other hand, Dad is a rock. He will never leave you if you do everything right. Beg him on your knees if necessary, but make him take you back." She was silent for a moment before she passionately pleaded. "Mom, don't wait too long, or I'm afraid you'll lose him." Kat's voice once again showed how wrong she really was. "You don't have to worry about your father and me. When the time comes that I'm done with Greg, he'll gladly take me back." Joan's voice was very skeptical. "I understand that you think you know Dad, but I've seen and talked to him. And he's definitely changing, and not for the better, it seems. He seems bitter and more distant since you left him. Are you really willing to risk 30 years of a good marriage to be with your high school sweetheart?" I had heard enough, so I chose that moment to enter the room and shouted with a forced smile, "Hey, Mommy, congratulations on your new son. You two parents must be thrilled." I walked over and hugged Joan, but pointedly ignored Katie. I know it was immature to ignore her, but it was getting easier in my life. Katie gave me a dirty look, but Joan was delighted as she asked, "Have you seen him yet, Dad?" I shook my head. "No, baby. I just came to see how you were doing." Finally, tired of being insulted, Katie intervened in a less than cordial tone. "Hello, Tom. How are you doing?" I looked at her for a moment and didn't answer, and then I turned my attention back to Joan, asking her about the birth and the baby's name. At the last question, Joan's face lit up, and she exclaimed joyfully, "Frank and I both agree that we want to name our baby Thomas, after you, Dad." It was at this point that Katie sullenly left the room, telling us she was going to see the baby. When she left, I took Joan's hands and held them as my tone of voice became serious. "Joan, you already know that your mom and I probably won't work out." I saw that the truth of my words hit her hard. "No, Dad, don't think so. She will soon come to her senses and be home again." I felt my eyes mist as I continued. "Baby, I now understand that I was never enough for your mother. I think something will happen soon." Shock and disbelief showed on her face. "What?" I smiled sadly. "In the near future, I'm going to start divorce proceedings after I put things in order a little." She was in tears when she answered, "Oh, Dad, I told Mom that she should beg you to come back, but it's actually too late, isn't it?" I nodded in agreement. "Yes, I won't be able to take her back. The memories of her deception would be too much for me. But please don't tell her anything yet, okay?" She nodded and pulled me towards her for a kiss. We talked for a few more minutes about a myriad of things, but pointedly avoided any mention of my wife or her lover. Finally, I told her I would be back tomorrow and left her to look at the baby. I found my way to the children's ward and found my grandson there among numerous babies. I was in awe of how small and precious it was, and I realized it was beautiful. Frank immediately walked towards me, standing between me, Katie, and Greg. With a smile on his face, Frank handed me a cigar. "Here, Dad, smoke to celebrate." I put the cigar in my pocket and patted him on the back. "I'll leave this for later, son. Thank you." Looking at my wife and her lover holding hands like two children, I felt sick. "Listen, Frank, I'll be back tomorrow. when it won't be so crowded and the air will be cleaner, if you know what I mean. Frank smiled knowingly. I completely understand you, Dad, and I don't blame you at all. As I was about to leave, Kat shyly called out to me, God, Tom, it seems like just the other day we were bringing our baby home, and now it seems so strange that our baby now has his own. I don't know where the time went, but it went too soon. I looked at her, still holding hands with Greg, and left the room without saying a word. She looked puzzled as I left them standing there. October came, and it turned out to be my best month since Katie left. I went to Vegas with the intention of hitting the tables and losing as an excuse to reduce our joint assets. But what made the trip so enjoyable was the woman I met while I was there. Her name was Miranda, and she was a mature woman of about 50. I was surprised that she was still in the profession, but she said that many men want an older woman, and in my case, she was right. Miranda was expensive, but she made me feel more alive than I had in years. For the first time since she left me, I didn't really miss Kat at all. Miranda was good both in and out of bed and seemed to take an interest in me, asking me for all the information about my soon-to-be ex-wife and her new lover. Before the night was over, she knew as much about me as I did. Miranda was stunned by my story and, leaving that evening, gently stroked my face. Tom, I've only known you for a few hours, but I want to tell you something. You're a good person, and that doesn't come around very often. Believe me, because I know what I'm saying. I've seen and been with thousands of men, and I can count on the fingers of one hand the ones I really liked and respected. You are one of them. Your wife has no idea what she's missing. However, don't let her actions and stupidity change you. And if you ever come back to town, give me a call because I'd really like to see you again. Miranda and Vegas left me more confused than I was when I arrived. I thought about Miranda's words and realized that she was right. I was going to take revenge on Katie for betraying me, even though she had been a good wife and mother for 30 years before the betrayal. No, I will not leave this marriage a ruined person. When I returned from Vegas, I told my lawyer to start preparing divorce papers. I also decided that I needed to find out a little more about Greg Hollander. On the recommendation of my lawyer, I hired a firm to find out his history from high school to the present. The company was expensive, but I didn't care since half the money would come from Katie's side. The firm was also reputed to be very thorough and assured me that they would have all the information I requested before Christmas. I also asked my boss about moving to a branch office of our company. At first, he was shocked because I always said that I would never move, but that was when I still had a family. He told me he would make inquiries and let me know. Thanksgiving was the next hurdle I had to overcome. Joan called me about a week before the holidays to ask if I would have dinner with them. When I asked if her mother and Slug would be present, she hesitantly answered yes. When I heard this, I firmly told her no and hung up. Surprisingly, my brother-in-law called me next. Frank called my office and asked for a meeting. We agreed on a time and I met him at a bar in the city center that was convenient for both of us for a quiet drink. The evening we met, I saw that he was excited. After our preliminary greeting, I ordered 2 double Scotch tapes. I sensed that something was bothering my son-in-law, so I sat back and listened to Frank tell me what was going on with my wife and daughter. Dad, you won't believe it, but they are both crazy about him. All you can hear is Greg this and Greg that. You could have sworn he was that guy from the beer commercial, you know, the most interesting man in the world. He paused to take a sip of his drink. I was surprised to think that he would come here tonight to persuade me to come to Thanksgiving. I needed to know, so I asked, Do I understand correctly, Frank, that you don't like dear Mr. Hollander? Frank looked at me with anger written all over his face. Dad, this man is arrogant, self-centered, selfish, and a lot of worse words. He's so in love with himself that for the life of me, I can't see where he has anything left for Katie. Realizing what he had just said, his face became dejected, and he quickly retreated. Sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to be disrespectful. I smiled at him. Don't worry, son. Don't be offended. When did you start calling her Katie instead of Mom? He looked depressed. When she left you. Since then, I have never had any respect for her. Now I was wondering, Why does it bother you that she left me, if I may ask? His face burned with anger again. I'm sure you noticed in the entire time I was with Joan that I never talked to you guys about my parents, and I appreciate that you never asked about them. The truth is that my mother cheated on my father. Well, after that, my parents separated, and my father never got over it. He drank himself half to death, and my mother died along with her lover in a car accident. I don't like cheaters, and now that Katie has become one, I really can't stand her anymore. I'm pretending to be Joan, but I'm worried. I had never known about Frank's parents before and felt his pain, but I was also puzzled by the source of his anxiety. Frank, you say you're worried. What's bothering you, son? He took a long sip from his glass and ordered another, then turned to me. I'll probably piss you off when I tell you this, but you asked it yourself. The old saying, like mother, like daughter, scares me. If Katie has turned into a cheater and keeps telling my wife how great it is, how long do you think it will be before Joan gets the idea to try some new man, too? My eyebrows raised at this. I think I understand your point of view. I joined him and took a long sip of my drink, contemplating my next move. Listen, Frank, don't be discouraged. I have a few surprises in my pocket, and I think things may start to change in the new year. I also want to tell you, strictly between you and me, that I have some plans that should make it a good Christmas for you and Joan, but not for the others, if you know what I'm getting at. Frank smiled for the first time since sitting at the bar and spent the next 15 minutes questioning me, to no avail. As we ended our meeting, I smiled again. Are you forgetting something, Frank? He looked puzzled. About what, Dad? I took him by the shoulder. Shouldn't you try to convince me to be a big boy and come to Thanksgiving? Frank's smile spread across his face like a flooding river. Sorry, okay. Will you come to Thanksgiving, Dad? I shook my head in response. No, but I appreciate the invitation. Joan called me twice more before Thanksgiving to beg me to come, until I finally put it into perspective. Look, Joan, when your mother left me because of this last June, I told her there would be no contact between us for the year she wanted to end our marriage. I have already broken this rule once at the birth of little Thomas, but I will not break bread with them. Is it clear? The holiday came and I ate a frozen dinner. I was lonely and sad, but I was in a better place than if I had to watch Katie and Greg make eyes at each other. December has arrived, and with it the specter of yet another family holiday. I was afraid of this, but I knew that it would be the last thing I would have to endure. December turned out to be a fruitful month. First, the company offered me a position in Spokane, Washington, starting in January if I was interested. I told them yes. Secondly, the private investigator's report on Mr. Hollander came in, and it was amazing. Apparently, old Greg had 3 wives, all of whom divorced him for adultery. Add to this 2 children from women other than his wives, for whom he was still paying child support, and the fact that his last wife received half of his pension in the divorce. The cherry on top of this spoiled ice cream was that Greg was transferred from E8 to E6 during his last year in the Corps. In short, his financial and moral situation seemed rather weak, not to say very bad. The latest good news is that Katie will receive her divorce papers on the first business day after Christmas. Yes, now I felt the old holiday spirit flowing through me. I called Joan and asked her about the plans for Christmas, and she again begged me to make it a real family affair. I asked if Greg would be present, and Joan got angry at me. Dad, you better get used to it. He's part of our family now, whether you like it or not. I stopped her abruptly. You're right, I don't like it, but for the sake of the child, I will be there. Joan seemed truly happy as she shouted, Thank you, Dad. This will make everyone so happy. I was pretty sure that wouldn't happen. But who am I to ruin the fun? 2 days later, after returning home from work, the phone rang, and without thinking, I picked up. Hello? The line was awkwardly quiet, and I was about to hang up when a voice finally answered. Tom, it's me, Kat. What happened, Kat? Are you injured? Her voice seemed timid as she spoke. "No, I'm fine, Tom. But I wanted to thank you for agreeing to come for Christmas. I know I hurt you, Tom, and I'm starting to realize how much, but I needed to tell you that I'm grateful, because in the last 30 years, we've never been apart for a single holiday. I was miserable at Thanksgiving without you, and I've been thinking about us so much lately." I interrupted her trip down memory lane. "Well, Katie, I'm glad to hear that you do think about us from time to time, but I should point out that when you started this whole vacation nonsense, I stipulated that there would be no communication between us. I relaxed this rule for one day, at Christmas, so I think we should end this conversation now. Goodbye." When I hung up the phone, I felt terrible because I had never spoken to her so harshly in all the 30 years of our life together. But as bad as I felt about what I said, it wasn't as bad as the day she left me. The month dragged by slowly, and I had plenty of free time to do my Christmas shopping. I wanted to make sure I had gifts for everyone for Christmas. I also packed all the things I was going to take with me to my new job and rented a car to drive across the country. I also spoke to a nice woman at my new office who said she had picked out a couple of very nice furnished apartments near the office. The good news was that she was going to show them to me in person when I arrived in Spokane. Yes, everything was going well for me in December. I arrived at Joan and Frank's on Christmas Day to find that Katie and her asshole had already gotten there. Joan grabbed me and hugged me tightly as I walked in with a bag of gifts. She made a remark about what a surprise and then headed back to continue preparing dinner. I just smiled, thinking, if only she knew what a surprise this was. Frank shook my hand and took my coat as I quickly asked, "Can I see my grandson?" Frank nodded and told me that he was sleeping in the nursery, but I could stop by. I quietly crept inside and looked at the sleeping figure in front of me. I felt a river of emotion flow through me, knowing that soon I would leave him, but I knew that I could not stay. I felt movement behind me as Katie silently walked over and stood next to me. I sensed the irony that this was where she should have been since June, next to me. Katie looked at me and said in a whisper, "We have a wonderful grandson, Tom." I was filled with sadness as I answered, "Yes, Katie, but who is he going to call Grandpa, me or the idiot, or both?" Katie seemed surprised by the question. "Why are you so stupid? You're the only grandfather this child will ever have, Tom." I muttered quietly, "Let's hope you're right, Katie." And then I left the room. The next few hours were interesting as Frank and I chatted while Joan, Kathy, and Greg seemed to be in their own world. I was disappointed at how quickly my daughter succumbed to Greg's charms. Frank just looked unhappy, but I told him to hang in there as things were going to change tonight. His eyes flashed as he said conspiratorially, "I hope so, Dad. I can't stand that idiot around her anymore." At this rate, he'll soon be playing with Joan. Dinner was served, and although the food was delicious, there was a lack of company. Again, I didn't feel the need to engage in conversation with either my wife or her lover, and Frank seemed pretty reticent to speak up too. The only one who spoke was Greg as he regaled the women with tales of his courage and perseverance in the face of the enemy. Watching Greg with his two-person fan club made me feel sick. After dinner, Joan brought the baby into their living room, and we all sat around together. I looked at my family, knowing that this would likely be the last time this family scene would play out in my life. Joan seemed happy as she excitedly told Frank to bring gifts. When he brought them over, she handed them to her mom, Greg, and me. Katie got a sweater, Greg got a gift card, and I got a tie. Useful, if boring gifts, just like myself, according to my wife and daughter. When Frank, Jane, and the baby opened their gifts from Kathy and Greg, Joan smiled and laughed, but Frank acted polite but distant. Once everyone had finished opening their gifts, the room became a little quiet as they looked at me and my bag of gifts. Finally, I broke this silence by saying, "I want to end this wonderful weekend by giving you all the gifts you deserve on this holiday." I stood up to grab the bag I had brought and handed Frank and Joan a large envelope wrapped in nice holiday paper. Joan tore the paper off the envelope while Frank stood and watched. When Joan took out the papers contained in the envelope and looked through them, she screamed with joy when she realized what it was. Katie shifted in her chair and seemed eager to find out what the papers contained. Joan wasted no time in bringing her up to speed as she shouted, "Oh, Mom! Dad gave us your house for free and without a mortgage. Now we can move out of this rental. Isn't that great?" Katie's face seemed to fall as she looked at me with concern. "Why did you do this, Tom? Where will we live?" I gave her a venomous look that I hoped would reach her heart. "Don't worry, Katie. I've thought of everything. Here, this is for you." And I handed her the card and the wrapped box. There was a look of timid hope on her face as she tore open the brightly colored paper and found a bracelet in the box. When she pulled it out with surprise written all over her face, I said, "Look at the inside of Kat. I wrote this." I noticed that Greg didn't seem very happy that I gave her a gift. She slowly turned it over and saw the words, "Thank you for the best 30 years of my life, Tom." I looked at the idiot, but he was still frowning at my gift. Katie looked confused. "Tom, thank you, dear. This is quite beautiful, but you forgot to write, 'with love.'" I smiled. "I didn't forget it, Kat. I just didn't want to lie. I have been steadily losing my love for you these past few months. This bracelet is my way of saying goodbye and will be a reminder of what you gave up for your asshole. I also need to tell you that you will be served with divorce papers on Monday." I clearly heard Joan take a deep breath, and Katie's face contorted with disbelief and despair. I nodded at the postcard. Inside the card, I tried to express my gratitude for the fact that you gave me so many wonderful years and a wonderful daughter. There is also a check for half of our liquid assets. Of course, there are not so many of them, $195, but I spent it during your absence. The house was mine to give to my daughter when you voluntarily left your marriage, but that's all explained in the card too. I looked at Greg and thought about the volcano that was about to explode. This gift is more for you too. I handed another large envelope to a clearly shocked Katie. Inside is the full story of what your lover has been up to since you broke up in high school. I think you will find this a fascinating read. Before I could finish my sentence, Greg roared at me, growling menacingly, "I'll kill you, you son of a bitch!" Greg never actually managed to hurt me, as he hit the floor hard when my stun gun hit him. Joan stood up, as did Katie, and I touched Greg's balls twice again, just to make sure he wasn't coming around too quickly. Coming closer to him, I said, "It hurts, doesn't it? Well, I'm here to tell you that your pain is nothing compared to losing the woman I loved for 30 years to a piece of shit like you." Katie was crying, like the world was ending when I turned to her. "I know you think I'm boring, and I don't curl your toes like that, Sergeant." Remembering him, I touched him again with the stun gun just because I liked seeing him convulse, and smiled evilly, not addressing anyone in particular. "This will never get old." I looked back at Katie, and with more bravado than I felt in my broken heart, I said bitterly, "Anyway, I know how you feel about this misunderstanding, so I'm giving you the best gift of all, Katie. Freedom. Now you can spend the rest of your life being treated like a princess during the day and having your toes curled at night. Wouldn't that be great for a traitor like you?" Katie seemed apoplectic as she managed to choke out, "No, it wasn't supposed to be like that. I was going to come back to you in June, Tom. I love you." Katie was shaking as hard as a leaf in a storm as Joan ran over to console her mother, and I tased the asshole one more time before Frank nervously intervened. "You better not do that again. You might kill him, Dad." I stood up, looking down at my convulsing nemesis, and then at the two women I loved more than life itself. "I'll leave now. Thank you for a wonderful day and for a wonderful life, since I won't see you both for quite a long time, most likely never." Both women seemed speechless and stared at me as if they no longer knew who I was. Frank brought my coat and handed it to me with a satisfied smile on his face. Before leaving, I turned once again to my daughter, who for the first time in her life was looking at me with fear in her eyes. "Joan, let this serve as a warning to you. If you go the way your mother did, you will pay the consequences just like she did. You will lose your husband, your home, your possessions, and the love of your life." I walked up to the cradle, where little Tom was looking up at me, and rubbed his cheek with my finger. "Bye, baby. Maybe we will see each other again someday. but for some reason I feel that, most likely, not. Still smiling, I headed towards the door and, turning to the silent room, simply said, "Happy New Year, guys." By the time I got to my car, the woman's shock must have worn off, or maybe the asshole had returned to duty, but I clearly heard one plaintive voice shout, "No, this can't happen to me." As I got in and started the engine, I thought Vegas was on the way to Spokane, and I wouldn't mind seeing Miranda again. As I was backing out, Frank came outside smiling and waving at me, and I waved back before heading west to a new life. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.